On paper, the Guns N' Roses and Metallica Stadium Tour in 1992 should have been one of the biggest tours in rock and roll history. But while many thought that nothing could go wrong, it was unable to live up to the hype and went crashing down in flames. Besides the grunge bands that exploded on the scene in the early 90s, Guns N' Roses and Metallica were two of the biggest bands in the world. Both bands had released hit albums in 1991 that attained mainstream success, and a stadium tour featuring both groups felt like a once-in-a-lifetime collaboration. But a series of unfortunate events plagued the tour, especially in the GN'R camp, culminating in a catastrophic tour stop in Montreal. Today we'll explore what happened during the ill-fated Guns N' Roses and Metallica Stadium Tour and how such a promising tour turned into a disaster. Guns N' Roses. By 1992, Guns N' Roses and Metallica had become two of the biggest rock bands in the world outside the grunge scene, and a concert tour featuring both bands was announced for the summer of that year. But 1992 was already 5 years after 1987, when Guns N' Roses perhaps made the most significant impact on rock music since the Rolling Stones. That year, the band released their debut album, Appetite for Destruction. At a time when Los Angeles was known for hair metal bands like Poison, Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, and Rat, GN'R decided to go against the flow and inject a renewed sense of danger into rock and roll. The result was Appetite for Destruction, released on July 21, 1987. Although it wasn't an immediate hit upon release, by the following year it began turning heads with hit singles such as Welcome to the Jungle and Sweet Child of Mine. Eventually, the record peaked at #1 on the Billboard 200. Today, Appetite for Destruction is the 7th best-selling album in the US and the best-selling debut album of all time. The following year, the band released GN'R Lies, half of which were the songs from their 1986 EP, Live Like a Suicide, and the other half were new acoustic songs. It took another 3 years for Guns to come up with a proper new album. Actually, make that 2. On September 7, 1991, the band released both Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. Both albums were highly anticipated and were commercially successful upon their release, although Use Your Illusion 2 was the slightly more popular album. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, while Use Your Illusion 1 debuted right behind it at #2. Metallica. Meanwhile, heavy metal titans Metallica had also just released their self-titled 5th album. Known to many as the Black Album due to its cover, it marked a departure from what Metallica initially became known for. In the 80s, the band was known for pioneering a faster, angrier, and more aggressive subgenre of metal called thrash. Their seminal 1986 album, Master of Puppets, is seen as the pinnacle of thrash and a heavy metal milestone. A few years later, they received their first Grammy Award for the song One. When the 90s rolled around, Metallica decided to change course. The results were more streamlined, straightforward, and commercially appealing heavy metal tunes like Enter Sandman and the ballad Nothing Else Matters, which appeared on the Black Album. Many old-school fans didn't like it, but nonetheless, it was a huge success. The Black Album was Metallica's first record to top the US charts and remains their best-selling album. The Tour. Guns N' Roses and Metallica initially met back in 1987, and 5 years later, both bands were the cream of the crop in their respective genres, with GN'R being the world's biggest hard rock band and Metallica claiming the heavy metal throne at the time. A co-headlining tour featuring both groups sounded like a match made in rock and roll heaven. Metallica drummer Lars Ulrich came up with the idea of a co-headlining tour. In May 1992, Lars and GN'R guitarist Slash officially announced the tour during a press conference at the Gaslight in Los Angeles. Both bands would have equal stage time, and Metallica would go on first, followed by GN'R. A nice little tidbit is that GN'R's frontman Axl Rose wanted grunge heavyweights Nirvana as the opener, but Kurt Cobain turned down the offer. As a result, Faith No More became the opening band. The tour kicked off on July 17, 1992 at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. However, red flags started popping up just a few shows into the tour, specifically with Guns N' Roses. Even more specifically with Axl Rose, who's probably the Mike Tyson of rock singers. As great as he is on the mic and on stage, Axl has a penchant for throwing temper tantrums, which has earned him a reputation as a polarizing performer. On just the 3rd show of the tour, Axl threw up on stage while performing the song You Could Be Mine and exited soon afterward. A short while later, he returned, apologized for the poor performance, and restarted the song. For the rest of the month, Axl claimed to have problems with his throat. He was eventually diagnosed with having damaged vocal cords and was advised not to sing for a week, forcing 3 shows to be rescheduled. The tour hadn't even lasted for a month, and it was already on the rocks. But the worst was yet to come. The riot in Montreal. On August 8, 1992, the tour stopped by Montreal's Olympic Stadium. A sold-out crowd of 55,000 packed the venue that night to witness Guns N' Roses and Metallica tear up the stage. By the end of the night, $500,000 worth of property ended up being torn instead. During Metallica's set, vocalist and guitarist James Hetfield stepped directly underneath pyrotechnics during the intro of Fade to Black. Now remember that this is the biggest tour that Metallica had done up to that point, so they decided to up the ante of their stage theatrics. That included more pyrotechnics than they'd ever worked with before, and although the band was informed of where the pyro would come from, they weren't familiar with such a setup yet, which probably led to James overstepping in the way of a 12-foot flame once it went off. Papa Het ended up with 2nd and 3rd degree burns, and the song stopped in its tracks. 10 minutes later, Lars announced to the crowd that James was rushed to the hospital and that Metallica had no other choice but to cut their set short, but promised to return to Montreal at a later date. With Metallica prematurely out, Guns N' Roses was up next. Fans waited for half an hour, which turned into a full hour, which turned into another hour, and as the delay went on, the crowd became increasingly restless. It took around 3 hours after Metallica halted their performance before Guns took the stage, and all was well again. At least, that's what it looked like for 9 songs. Faulty monitors were causing sound problems, which meant the band had a hard time hearing each other. Additionally, Axl began complaining about his throat again. Guns eventually cut their set short after Axl decided he couldn't sing properly and abruptly left. Feeling screwed out of the biggest show they could have witnessed in their lives, the fans erupted into a riot that spilled out into the streets of Montreal. Angry fans flipped cars, smashed windows, started fires, and destroyed whatever they could get their hands on while voicing their disdain for Guns N' Roses. Things got so out of hand that the local police had to intervene, and soon after, the riots attracted the attention of national TV. It was estimated that around 10,000 people took part in the riots, resulting in $500,000 of damages, 10 injuries, and 6 arrests. James Hetfield later said that Axl could have saved the day that night, but decided to put his ego before professionalism, inadvertently causing the riots. In his autobiography, Slash implied being embarrassed in front of Metallica due to the events that transpired. Despite the riots, the tour continued as scheduled, although many dates after the Montreal show had to be rescheduled, partly because of James's injuries. The tour resumed on August 25, 1992, when James took the stage in a cast that took his entire left arm, preventing him from playing the guitar. Kirk Hammett's guitar tech and Metal Church guitarist John Marshall took on rhythm guitar duties for the remainder of the tour, while James resumed his vocal duties. The tour wrapped up at the Kingdome in Seattle on October 6, 1992. By its end, it was a financial success for Metallica. The same cannot be said for Guns N' Roses, though. According to Slash, much of the band's tour earnings were consumed by Axl's overspending on backstage parties and the fines they had to pay due to being late numerous times. It could have been a tour for the ages that saw 2 Hall of Fame bands put on the best rock show in the world. Instead, it became an example of how a bloated rock star ego can make history for all the wrong reasons.